welcome friends to another edition of Paul's Prattles. Today, it's the second half, part 2, of the comparison of big tobacco and big food, or big sugar, you could say, the sugar industry and the tobacco industry, and how those two parallel each other, and they're kind of on similar courses. So I just want to say, though, I had a really nice Halloween. I hope you did too. And I was walking down the street here, and kids are in full costume, and people are throwing candy down PVC pipes and connecting candy to steel beams and laying it all over the ground. It was truly a wonderland of candy. And I was walking and I was thinking, you know, I've been kind of a curmudgeon about sugar. And I have to say that I really, I love Halloween. It's the best holiday of the year, in my opinion. And the idea of candy being a part of it is sweet, wonderful. But the thing about it is that candy is special because it's candy, and we know what it is. Like, there's no secret about that it's not something you want to eat all the time. It's a special treat. You know, it's exciting, it's fun, it's special. What gets me and what upsets me, where sugar is put into foods where you wouldn't know it's there, where preservatives are put into foods that you think are healthy, herbicides, pesticides are, you know, a part of food that we think is healthy, and things are labeled as natural or healthy or this or that, and the truth is that they're not. And so that's really my beef, is when we become kind of seduced or even tricked into thinking that we're eating well, and the truth is we're not. I am not like an anti-sugar, you know, crazy person that thinks that all sugar should be banned and anybody that eats sugar is horrible. Of course not. I mean, I'm a fan myself, but I try to recognize where it is and how it's being kind of like slid into our food supply in a way. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. And Mikoso also, I'm gonna just say hi, Mikoso, or say hi to Mikoso. He doesn't eat sugar. He knows. All right, so here we go. This is a little longer one, so hang in there if you're interested in this prattle, and I think you'll enjoy it. A few weeks ago, I spoke about how the tobacco industry's highly addictive product hooked a majority of the US population, and that when the data started coming in that showed smoking to be linked to devastating illnesses, they proceeded to confuse the public by paying scientists to create biased studies. This is a story that most of us probably know about, at least for the most part. However, we may not realize that the same thing is happening today with sugar, though it's harder to see or even believe because it's often harder to see things as they are happening in the moment. Hindsight is where everything becomes more clear, and as I've stated, I believe that future generations will look back at our cavalier attitude towards sugar with horror and disgust. Today, I want to highlight some more ways in which sugar and tobacco are leading parallel lives. All right, so number one, co-opting. Tobacco. In 2009, Philip Morris supported and lobbied for legislation that would give the FDA limited regulatory authority over cigarettes. So in other words, the FDA would put its seal of approval on cigarettes so that cigarettes companies could truthfully say that their product is approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which is just and this is in 2009, so this is very recent, that, you know, the tobacco industry is still getting in. The idea was to give the public the idea that cigarettes are safer because they are federally regulated, despite the fact that the FDA has done nothing whatsoever to make cigarettes safer or reduce smoking amongst the youth. Win for tobacco. Sugar. To find a good example of how money and power of big food corporations can influence important health and wellness campaigns coming from the highest levels of government, You don't have to look farther than Michelle Obama's Let's Move program. So this is kind of the focus of this prattle, in a way. Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign started with the best of intentions. Correctly recognizing the growing danger of childhood obesity and chronic illness, the program started with a strong message, but eventually got co-opted by Big Food, Nestle, Kellogg, General Mills, American Beverage Association, which represents Coke, Pepsi, places like that. When she began, the campaign's focus was on food, swapping out junk food for nutritious food, limiting exposure of kids to media that promoted toxic or food that is bad for you. And also exercise. So in 2010, she gave this speech to the National Grocers Association, recognizing the obvious fact that kids are highly influenced by the ads they see on television, 70% of which contain worryingly unhealthy foods, and as adults, as a society, we need to protect them. That was her kind of idea. Here's a transcript of her speech. Anyways, there's a transcript of her speech if you want to scroll down. It's a pretty great speech, actually. When Big Food heard this, they knew immediately this campaign posed a threat to their business model, which relies heavily on marketing disease-causing foods to children. They realized they had to act, and act they did. As they say, keep your friends close, enemies closer. And they became partners. So they partnered up with Let's Move, and in short order, the program became almost singularly focused on exercise and fitness, further amplifying the injury-created lie that the obesity epidemic is caused by laziness and we can just exercise our way out of it. They say a calorie is a calorie, so just eat however you want and exercise more. I want to talk about this for a second because the meme that we are lazy and that we can just exercise our way out of this problem was created by people who are trying to sell junk food, especially the most damaging junk food of all, which is soda. And the message has penetrated the psyches of a good portion of the American public. In other words, they did their job. So are we just lazy? So let's look at a fairly common school lunch. The kid has a 12-ounce soft drink, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, some chips, some Doritos maybe, and maybe a Snickers for dessert, let's just say. It's not a super healthy meal, of course, but I used to teach in the public schools, and I know how kids eat. That's probably not an unusual lunch. If they eat that, I did the math, they would have to walk about 4.5 hours just to burn off lunch. So that doesn't include any snacks, doesn't include any dinner, breakfast, whatever. So as I say, they better get some really good walking shoes because they're gonna be walking pretty much 24 hours a day, and that probably still won't be enough to burn off all the calories that they are eating. And of course, those calories are dangerous calories. They're not calories that support the body, the processes of the body, the organs of the body, the cells of the body. It doesn't, they become very deficient in those things and then subject and prone to disease. So it's not just that they're eating one bad thing, it's that because they're eating those things, they're not eating the good things. And of course, when you have the taste for sugar in your mouth all the time, things that aren't sweet, even things like blueberries and things like that, they are no longer interesting for them to eat. They're not sweet. They don't have a lot of flavor, whatever. So they get hooked on these other things. So the second thing is that the idea of a calorie is a calorie. So in other words, no matter what form it takes, you have a walnut, you have a soda. You have 10 calories of walnut, you have 10 calories of soda. What's the difference? All right. Mark Hyman wrote about a study of 154 countries that looked at the correlation of calories, sugar, and diabetes. And scientists found that by adding 150 calories a day to the diet, barely raised the risk of diabetes in the population. But if those 150 calories came from soda, the risk for diabetes went up 700%. So 150 calories from just other foods, whole foods, and then 150 from soda, risk of diabetes goes up. It's the same amount of calories, 150 calories, diabetes 700% if they drink the soda. So a calorie is not a calorie after all. So the Let's Move campaign was helpful, no doubt, and I don't want to throw too much shade on Michelle, especially at this moment when we can see how much worse it can be. But what happened to the Let's Move campaign is a good example of how money, lobbying, and corporate influence serves to undermine public health messages and puts our children, who become sick adults, in harm's way. All right, so more on hooking kids. Tobacco. Knowing they needed to hook people as young as possible on their product, they created a cartoon character, Joe Camel, and created advertising at eye level for the kids, so the kids could see it. As recently as 1981, an internal Philip Morris document said the following: today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer. And the overwhelming majority of smokers first began to smoke while still in their teens. The smoking patterns of teenagers are particularly important to Philip Morris. This is a direct quote. That's been unearthed recently, those internal memos. Okay, sugar. Do I even need to say anything about marketing of sugar to kids? In a study published in the Journal of Nutrition, Education, and Behavior in 2009, they found that fast food restaurants, sugary foods, chips, crackers, and sugar-added beverages collectively accounted for more than 70% of the food commercials during Saturday morning and weekday afternoon cartoons. Countries such as Mexico, Norway, Greece, and Iran, to name only a few, ban advertising of sodas and unhealthy food during programming geared towards children. So why are we not at least protecting our kids? All right. Next one. Muddying the waters by scientists on the payroll. Tobacco. Realizing that their industry would be damaged by linking cancer and smoking, they funded studies that found no correlation. They did this for secondhand smoking as well, as a study of 50 million pages of leaked internal documents uncovered. I wonder if that might be the same internal documents that showed the Philip Morris statement. All right, sugar. Realizing their industry would be damaged by the linkage between sugar consumption and heart disease, the Sugar Research Foundation, quote unquote, began funding, well, actually that was the name of the Sugar Research Foundation, began funding research that blamed saturated fat, and this is a huge one right here, blamed saturated fat for the increase in heart disease. And this, again, according to internal memos unearthed in an article by JAMA Internal Medicine in 2016. All right, in 1977, George McGovern chaired a committee in the Senate who wrote the first dietary guidelines for Americans. Now, there was this guy, Mark Hegsted, a Harvard physician, who wrote an article in 1967 in the New England Journal of Medicine that blamed fat and gave sugar a pass. He became the head of the committee that McGovern chaired. And this committee suggested that it wasn't sugar, it wasn't a problem with sugar, it was a problem with fat. And this became kind of U.S. policy of saying we have to get rid of the fat, we have to get rid of the fat, and the whole food industry changed in response. This was a boom for the food industry because suddenly they could re-engineer their product, call them healthy products, and all they did. Now, the problem was when you take the fat out of things, it tastes like crap, and so you have to add a lot of sugar in order to make it palatable. So all this low-fat stuff was increasing the amount of sugar in our diet. And there's this paper that this one guy, a thesis paper, that says how the U.S. low-fat diet recommendations of 1977 contributed to the declining health of Americans. So there's, I've got that link on the paper as well. So, by the way, this guy was that was the head of the committee that suggested this, or he was paid $50,000 by the sugar lobby. Surprise, surprise. All right, blaming their customers. Here we go. Tobacco. When it came to light that tobacco was a toxic substance and they could no longer disabuse the science, the industry began blaming individuals for abusing their industrially produced, highly addictive product that they hook people on from a very young age. And then sugar. When experts began to identify sugar's role in the growing crisis of chronic disease, i.e. 1 in 4 teens now has prediabetes, etc., Coca-Cola's chief scientist, Rana Applebaum, brought the sugar industry together, began funding research to the tune of $120 million that blamed lack of exercise as being the primary cause of chronic disease, and finding that soft drinks and sugar are basically harmless. Okay, so just blame it on the exercise. That's what they did. All right, so finding new markets, tobacco. When the U.S. markets became limited to big tobacco, they began putting energy into overseas markets. Today, more than half of Chinese men smoke. Sugar. As the U.S. is becoming more aware of the dangers of excess sugar consumption, they find fresh markets overseas. Between 1980 and 2010, diabetes in China has gone from 0.67% of the population to 11.6% of the population, a 17-fold increase. Of course, the increasing wealth, urbanization, and on-the-go lifestyle has led to more eating out, more fast food, more reliance on easy-to-eat processed foods that are laden with sugar, bad fats, preservatives, artificial colors, etc. And less on the homemade food that they ate previously to the big tech revolution. So last paragraph here, a sweet, lower sugar future. Clearly, sugar is following the tobacco playbook. Due to escalating out-of-control healthcare costs, eventually, as a society, we will have to look upstream to recognize the reasons people are getting so sick to begin with. We are very concerned about the costs and care, but we are less willing to look deeply at the cause. So we're concerned about the costs, rising healthcare rates, all this stuff. Why is it happening? We got to look at the cause. There's a lot more money in curing disease, though, than in preventing the disease to begin with. I mean, obviously, this is a huge industry. However, it is in the cause that we need to be focusing our efforts. Hopefully, the food industry will succumb to the overwhelming body of evidence and increasing public pressure to re-engineer their products so they are more healthy. However, because of disinformation campaigns that promote bad science, sounds familiar, right? Bought and paid for, infiltration of industry people in government and policy-making positions, as well as the proliferation of front groups and lobbyists with deep pockets that spread false information in the name of science. It may take some time before they are more aggressively managed. In the meantime, we don't have to play that game as long as we eat food, not too much, mostly plants. We will be voting to say, with our dollars, we will be voting to say that we prefer to spend our dollars on sustainably and healthy produced food rather than on medications and doctor visits. It was interesting that Mark Hyman also wrote, he was a speaker at a conference of healthcare practitioners and talking about the costs of, figuring out how they're going to manage the massively increasing costs of healthcare in this country. And he was the first one that got up on stage and said, hey, maybe we need to look at why people are getting sick to begin with and stop it there. But as opposed to waiting till they get sick and then figuring out how to manage the exorbitant costs of that. And there was like silence, and then it was like the first time that idea even had been mentioned in this group, and people were like kind of blown away by it. So it seems so obvious, but at the same time, when you get into a certain mindset, it's hard to see outside of that mindset, and I feel like that's kind of where we're at. So anyways, that was a long prattle, I know. Thanks for hanging with me and making it to the end. Subscribe, smash that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week. Have a good week. Bye.